Hey everyone, Synthetic Future here, and welcome to the attic. This is going to be one of those super rambly type videos, so if you're not into the rambly type videos, it's probably best to skip this one. I will do a better video on this topic, but just want to talk a little bit about workflow and interfaces, ADAT and patchbay, because I think that's a pretty interesting topic. There are a lot of videos about it, but for this video I want to talk a little bit about how you work up to having a patchbay, and whether or not it's something you actually need. So let's first get down to the nitty-gritty. What is a patchbay? That's a patchbay. If it focuses, yeah, there we go. So just a preemptive warning, the sound in this video will be from my micro Uzis used as lavalier mic, so I'm interested to see if this works. Hopefully it's not too noisy. If it is, well, that's just a damn shame. Anyways, let's talk about patchbay. So this thing here is a patchbay. It's made by Samsung and it's the S Patch Plus, which is right there. It should focus. There we go, Samsung. And it says there S Patch Plus. Love it when it works. And right on top of it is my PreSonus Studio 1824C. Which is not going to focus properly. Oh, there we go. So, as I said in this video, I want to work up to how we got into this situation and why I chose this as an option over some other solutions that I also want to highlight. Because I think it's interesting to talk about, especially hardware gear, because there is a lot of solutions to the same problem, honestly. So let's start off way back, well, it's actually just a couple of years really, when I decided I wanted to become one of those people who makes beats and never finishes anything and calls themselves a creative person. It's pretty much the story. I always did some music stuff, and I already had my eDrum kit, which is currently gathering dust in this corner of the room. Clearly needs to be tested and I need to make some space, but I was at that time a drummer in a metal band, a folk metal band, and the band fell apart and I wanted to keep making music. I figured electronic music is very fun and it's something you can do a lot easier alone, unlike many rock and metal genres which do require bandmates. So yeah, it's a little bit trickier. So I decided to get into this music thing. I didn't have much to go by, so I downloaded some software, just some simple software, synthesizer stuff, and I messed around with it a little bit. It kind of worked, but it also kind of didn't work. Turns out, synthesizers, not that easy to learn, which you always find out once you buy stuff. So I figured I needed a solution to better learn synthesizers, and for that I started looking on the local eBay, Craigslist, however you want to call it, Marktplaats we call it, for some synthesizers to learn synthesis. And my requirements were pretty easy. It needed to be fairly flexible, not too expensive, because, well, it's a hobby, and it needed some functionality, so it had to be somewhat complex, so it didn't like phase out within a few days. So what I got was this, and you've probably seen this. It's a very divisive little instrument. There we go. That's the Roland System 1. Actually found this one second hand. I think I paid something like 200, maybe 240 euros for it. And it's a pretty capable little synthesizer with plenty of options. The looks are a bit polarizing. I think it's pretty cool. But the most important thing is it's very easily laid out. It's fairly flexible in sound. And you have some hands-on control, so you can learn a lot faster how things work. Now, the issue with things that need to be connected to a computer, of course, is that you need some sort of device to actually connect them to a computer. And so far all I had connected was that drum kit, which just uses a USB, which fed into addictive drums, which I already used at that time. And that was it. So I never really needed like a fancy interface. I just needed some sort of interface to put my headphone into, and that was it. But clearly we had to upgrade now, because we now had an instrument which requires inputs. So for this, I bought this thing. And this is the Roland Rubix 44. It's not going to see this, probably. You're going to have to believe me. It's the Rubix 44. It's actually, honestly, a very nice interface. I really like the format. It's really nice and heavy. It has these clipping lights at the top, which are pretty cool. So you can very easily see if you're clipping or not. Built-in limiter, which is very nice. There's threshold here for both sets. Dual monitor output. And on the back it has a few goodies as well. It has a ground lift, 4 outputs, and all that sort of cool stuff. Very nice little interface. And most importantly, it has 4 inputs, which is very nice, because I had a synthesizer with 2 inputs, so I had 2 inputs left for, I don't know, whatever I was planning to do at that point. So that's very nice and functional. And at some point I figured, well, if we're going to do this kind of synthwave, synth pop, space pop thing, probably need to get something a little bit more genre-like than a System 1. So I figured I needed some sort of synthesizer from the time. And there's basically 3 options. You can either go DX7, you can go with the Korg M1, or you can go with the Roland D50. Well, obviously I went with the Roland D50, because I'm not nearly sadistic enough to learn FM synthesis, especially not at that point. So I grabbed this very nice D50. And just to prove it actually still works, because I haven't showed it off in a while, it does. There you go. Very nice synthesizer. Only problem is it has a slight hum on the power supply, so that might be a project to fix, but for the time being it's fine. So now I had 2 synthesizers, and synthesizers are stereo for the most part, even the venerable little System 1, because it has a reverb, is actually stereo, even though there is no per oscillator padding. So if you really want to use it properly, you can plug it into a stereo source. So I now had 2 stereo keyboards. I had 4 ports on my interface, which meant I had exactly 0 inputs left. Which was fine, because I had 2 synthesizers and my drum kit was going over USB, so we're all good. But as things go, you always find new things to buy. I think most people will eventually get into that phase. Now, many people grow out of it as well. Some people never enter the phase, but most people at some point look at their stuff and go, maybe I should just buy myself something nice, right? It's pretty normal behavior. So it wasn't actually that long after I got the D50 that I noticed there was a thing called the JV 1080, which is kind of a studio legend. Also the cheapest rack synthesizer, and it's a rack synthesizer. So I was just, again, looking at Craigslist a little bit, and this thing pops up. This is a JV 880. So it's not the 1080, that's the 1080. This is the 880. It's basically a slimmed down 1080. There's some differences, but roughly that's how it works. So this unit was actually sold to me for like $10. There was this guy that bought a rack full of stuff, and he actually didn't know what the stuff was, most of it. And he basically said, I'll take $10 for it, and it's fine. So I said, sure, I'll take it. So now I had this little thing here, this big thing here, and this thing. Now the fun thing of these JVs is that they actually use multiple patches, which can be outputted independently. It's just very nice, but of course it takes up a lot of inputs from your audio device. And my first solution was the very obvious, well, just plug in whatever you need, and then you can disconnect whatever you don't need, and just switch things out as you go. It's, in all fairness, a fine solution, but at some point you get a little bit annoyed with constantly unplugging and plugging things. So there needed to be a better solution. And that's where kind of the story of all this stuff starts. So basically there are a few options with this. You can buy a bigger interface with more inputs. You can buy a mixer, or you can buy a patchbay. So back then I was living in a different house with less space. As you can see, there's quite a bit of space here. I mean, it's full of stuff. But there's a fair bit of space. The studio space I had at the time was basically as wide as the drum kit, and as long as this desk combined with the drum kit. So basically, if we were standing here, this would be a wall, and this would be a wall, and I'll insert a picture. Basically, there wasn't that much space. So at first I was thinking, oh, a mixer would be fine. You can just mix things together, and that works well. But I don't have much space. So getting one of those big table-style mixers with all the cool faders and stuff definitely was out of the question. And that's where Behringer saved the day, because they actually make this very nice little thing. If it will focus. Hey, there we go. This is the Behringer Eurorack Pro. It's a mixer 1602, RX 1602, and it's basically a small mixer. It's also rack size, so it fits very well with the JV 880. I'll actually insert a picture of them living together in this little thing that I made in my desk. So this keyboard riser actually housed the 880 and the mixer. And I routed everything to the mixer. And this mixer is pretty cool because it has stereo pairs. So you actually have a balance control. You have a FX, mono FX thing, and a level. And it has a little clipping light thingy, which is pretty neat. And it has an output level meter thingy. It's actually not connected, I can't show it right now, but that's basically the entirety. So you take every synth you have, you run it into here, a single stereo pair out, which worked fine because I had two pairs, and we're off to the races. Very simple setup, just use whatever you want. You sum it here, you run it into your audio interface. And that's a very cost-efficient way of doing this, because the 2 or 4 input audio interfaces aren't all that expensive. I'm not entirely sure on the price, but this is like, I don't know, 150, maybe $200, something like that. Might be more expensive now, of course, because all the prices are going wild, but something like that. And these things are not all that expensive as well, maybe $100. Something in those lines. I actually bought it secondhand. It had like, there was a small issue with it. It's working fine now. So that's very cost efficient. But at some point, well, we got some more stuff like this Roland Super JV 1080, which is an absolutely beautiful machine. That's the machine I actually wanted over the 880. But ironically, the 880 is pretty cool as well, so I want to keep that one as well. And of course, the very nice JDXA by Roland. There's a little bit of a theme going on here with Roland, more Roland. Totally not biased or anything. Anywho, more things. Obviously, you can route them into the mixer. There's plenty of space there. Run them into the interface. Works like a charm. Honestly, that setup totally works. The added benefit of that setup is you can actually run all the instruments at the same time. So if you're like a cable or something that can play all these synthesizers at the same time, and if you're going to do all the sequencing stuff, that's a very reasonable setup and compact. And if you want to, you can just add another one of these underneath it, and you will have 16 channels per, 32 channels to play with. Or basically, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times 2 synthesizers, so that's 16 stereo synthesizers. That's quite a lot. A lot more than I would actually need. So that setup was actually fine. Until at some point I had this really stupid idea that I actually wanted to do some YouTube content stuff. Now, YouTube content stuff in itself is not really an issue. Let me just quickly get a little bit more light, maybe. I don't know. YouTube stuff in itself is not really an issue. It is when you want to capture your screen and your DAW and have sound and all that stuff where it becomes a little bit messy. And I learned that quite quickly, that doesn't always work as well with DAWs and signaling to OBS and a DAW. It was messy, so I needed a better solution. And that's when I learned about loopback. And loopback is awesome because it saves you a lot of routing troubles with Windows drivers for sound and your DAW and OBS. It's basically loopback, send that to OBS, use your DAW as regular, everything works. It's brilliant. Problem being that this interface does not have loopback, which really is a damn shame, because if this thing had loopback, I would absolutely recommend it to everyone, but it doesn't. So yeah, that's where the Presonus comes in, which is an absolutely overkill interface for what I'm doing. 6 inputs, ADAT, or 8 inputs even. ADAT capability, super fancy preamp stuff. It's a very nice interface. And the upside of having 8 inputs is that you can actually plug in most synths at the same time, which is cool. The rest went through the mixer, which is fine. And then you also have some front inputs. So when I bought my bass, that worked out great, because, well, you can just jack it into the front. And you also have a front input for a microphone, which is awesome when you want to record voiceovers or screen grab with a mic. So that solution, totally fine. I would actually say that solution is pretty good for a lot of people. Just use a good interface and combine it with a mixer. If you have a little bit more space, I would take one with the faders, because it just works a little bit faster. But you know, if you're shy on space, this thing, really not that bad. But well, you can see where this is going. Obviously, I had some stupid ideas again, and I figured, well, maybe it's fun to be able to play guitar without actually having to turn on your PC. Because if you spend a lot of time on your PC, at some point you're not practicing anymore, you're just browsing YouTube, and that's about it. So I figured I needed some sort of setup where I could play guitar with some effects because I'm not that good, so I need a lot of effects to hide the fact that I suck at guitar. And I figured, let's build a small pedalboard. Now, the small pedalboard thing is going to be covered in a small video series at some point. I am scripting it out right now. Eventually it will become a series. Basically, it started as a very small pedalboard, which I will find some photos of, with a very core concept that I wanted to do a simple octave splitting thing, royal blood style, high octave, low octave, different distortions, and just have a very small board that I could just have at my desk, turn off my PC, have some fun with a guitar. That was the main premise, and that kind of spiraled into this. Now, let me see if I can get a little bit more light in here. It's going to be tricky, but we can make it work. There we go. So this obviously got a little bit out of hand. Can you see a theme with things getting out of hand? Well, this got out of hand. And yeah, well, it's pretty cool. Anyways, you get to that point where you have this stuff, you have all this stuff, and that stuff, and stuff, and it kind of gets annoying to constantly be routing stuff through your DAW and messing with stuff, and it kind of gets annoying, honestly. It was at this point that I thought I need to find a way to have everything connected so I can just do stuff without having to mess with routings too much in my DAW. Just turn stuff on, play stuff, and actually record stuff again. And as a nice bonus, it would be cool to actually use some of these effects combined with maybe some synthesizers. Could be fun. Or maybe just an electric guitar, which is actually not here, but I also have an electric guitar somewhere. So this is where I started thinking maybe I need an ADAT interface. And an ADAT is basically, it's usually are called expansions. They basically add channels to your existing interface, which is very nice. There's a little problem. They are pretty expensive. As in, I think the cheaper ones are like $400 for 8 channels. 8 channels sounds like plenty, until you realize that every one of these things eats 2 channels. And these as well. I mean, technically this one eats like 4, and this one as well. So you run out of channels really fast, and if you want to use your pedalboard, you actually have to disconnect whatever it is and plug it into your pedalboard. And most of that stuff is going to be behind your rack, or you are going to have a waterfall of cables in front of your rack, which also sucks. And that's the point where I figured that for my very specific weird needs, the patchbay was a very good solution. So essentially what a patchbay is, let's not get too much into details, but essentially what it is you take all your inputs and outputs, so all my inputs from my audio interface and all my outputs from the many bits of equipment, and you just put them all in this row. That's it. That's what a patchbay is. Now, the fun thing of the patchbay is you can actually set it so it will push your signal through from the top to the bottom. So you have a few things always connected. So this is my guitar, that's my microphone. Right here we have the D50, JDXA, and that's the system 1. And these are connected directly to the audio interface. So if I am to turn this on, the nice thing is I can do this without actually having the computer on. So there we go. Doesn't have USB, so it's a little bit mad, but that's fine. So now I can quickly turn on my sound, turn on my D50, and turn on my JDXA. Cool, I think. So if I play something here, thought I turned the sound on. Oh, might have it muted. Anyways, if I play something here, it will show up. It will show up on channel 3 and 4 because 1 and 2 are the front jacks. So this 1 is my mic, 2 is the guitar. 3 and 4 is the D50. If I play the JDXA, that's if it wants to focus. Oh man. That's 5 and 6. And if I move over here, just going to have to trust me, you will see that's 7 and 8. So these are connected by default. Very nice and easy. And if I want to use other instruments, so let's say I want to use the JV, I will not leave it on too long because there's a capacitor that needs replacing and blah blah. Anyways, I can just say I want to have this right there. If you push this button, it will do a test tone thing. And there we go. That's right there. And if I want to have the, I'll turn this off, the 1080, which has a horrible screen, but it's on, trust me. I can just move these over. So this is the 880 and the 1080 is right here. So now if I push the button of the 1080, that button, there we go. So whenever I want to connect anything, you just do it here, which saves so much time. And the even more fun thing here is, which is probably not entirely how a patchbay should be used, but whatever, is that I actually wired in my pedalboard. And for this, yeah, it's a little bit of a cheat. But basically what I did is I connected this input to this output. So there's a cable behind the unit going from here to here. This cable goes to my pedalboard. And I have this dangly cable here, which comes out of my pedalboard. It's behind there somewhere and comes up here. I need to cable manage this. That's not what this video is about. But essentially if I take my JV1080 and I need to turn on my pedalboard, just a second. Oh, it does not like that. There we go. Hey, awesome. So, there we go. So the 1080 is now connected to the pedalboard. So if I push the little button here, the tuner will fire up because it's getting a signal. If I let it go, it will fade out. This is a very long pad sound, so it takes a little bit of a second to stop. And I can route this back to our patchbay, for instance here. Just plug it in, and now if I play some sound, it will go through the pedalboard and will show up right there. And I can do this with any synthesizer because all the connections are here and I don't have to move anything, I don't have to touch any wires at all, and it's awesome. So do you need a patchbay? No, you don't. If you have a smaller setup, you're not planning to move things around, you're not planning to do like outboard effects, and you just have a couple of instruments, buy a mixer. Or if you have fewer than 8 things, buy a big interface. That's an option as well. But if you have a couple of instruments and you're looking for a good solution to quickly get things done, get an interface with 4 inputs, a Scarlett, a Roland, a Apollo, a whatever, and just hook a mixer onto it. And you will have all the flexibility you want without having to worry too much about things. And if you're actually interested into wiring stuff, outboard gear, and routing your signals through it, you can definitely get a patchbay, which is a very good solution to quickly put stuff in between stuff without having to mess in your DAW. it's very quick and accessible. Or if you have a lot of instruments which you only use every once and so often, so you don't have to have them all connected at the same time, it's actually a very affordable option as well. If you have a acoustic drum kit and you're planning on miking it up all fancy with like the 2 snare mics and the kick mic and the tom mics and the 2 overheads and the room mics and all that stuff, you're probably going to need a big interface and like a ADAT expansion option with extra preamps, because at that point you actually need microphone preamps because you have that many mics. So it's basically a must to go that way, or have an interface that actually has that many inputs. But I'm not quite aware of interfaces like that. They are probably there. They're probably very expensive. This with an ADAT is 800-ish, I think, if you get the Behringer ADAT, and then this unit, it's along those lines. But that's a pretty fair amount of money. Quite a bit more than, let's say, one of these combined with one of these, or a cheap mixer, which does most of the things you probably want to do. So that's a very long video. In fact, it's so long that I actually went over the limit of my camera. That's why there was an awkward cut a little bit back. But I kind of wanted to tell my story, my thought process, my experience with doing these things. If there are any questions about patchbays, interfaces, blah blah blah, you can drop them down below in the comments, and I'll do a more proper video at some point. But I just wanted to get the story out, have a little bit of fun, and hopefully you enjoyed it. So that's it from the attic with a dying battery. I'm going to say bye bye and see you later.